Thank you, Henry. Our next speaker is Karim Lakhani. He's a professor at Harvard Business School and the PI of the Harvard NASA Tournament Lab. He's been doing really creative and interesting research about open innovation for a number of years. Karim.
Thank you. It'll take me a second to set up. Okay, so thank you so much for the invitation. I'm always nervous to speak at a collective intelligence crowd because I know from my own research that collectively you're way smarter than I am. So it's always like, oh my God. Secondly, to see my name in 50-point font, 2 feet high is always nervous too, because this work that I'm going to represent is collectively produced as well. So I think there's a couple of colleagues here, Chris Riedel and Anita Woolley, who have participated with me and my own lab in doing this work. And so it's always again, I think our systems of academic presentations and so forth don't actually reflect the whole collective work that we actually do and participate in. So I'm just going to give you a quick message about what I'm going to talk about, give you an overview, and then give you some details from there. So the first thing I want to say is that what used to take government legislation in the 1700s, the Longitude Prize being set up, and trying to get crowds to work on important scientific problems, you can now do with a credit card. All right, so now platforms are available on demand. Crowds can be conjured up within a few days. I've just been amazed over the last decade to see both these commercial platforms arise, but also academics have got into the game, and a range of examples where academics can conjure up thousands of people to work on a particular problem. And this, I think, is actually very new in the world and portends some very interesting opportunities for us. The second thing I want to say is that, at least the way I look at the world, is that we can organize crowds into both communities, a la open source, Wikipedia, and so forth, or contests, winner-take-all type contests as well. And both of these systems actually work quite well. And I'll show you some data about the differences. But those are two distinct institutions that you can get going in terms of organizing crowds. The third thing is to get behind why, and I'll show you some pretty remarkable data, why crowds do so well. And the main power that we see in crowds is numbers. We have lots of independent attempts at the problem, and also diversity. Diversity in the actors, diversity in the knowledge bases. And those two things often will swamp out any one organization or one team trying to solve the problem themselves. And there's some basic statistical mechanisms behind why this works. And I'll try to show you some insights on that. And then finally, the message I want to give you is oftentimes crowds have been shown as a substitute to organizations. I work at Harvard Business School. We get all businesses come to us, and they get very nervous when they see these crowds. And yes, in many cases, crowds have become substitutes. But I think the most productive conversation is going to be integration and complementarity. How can organizations, incumbent organizations, use crowds to solve problems? And I say, yet, in the sense that we are seeing a bunch of new firms emerge that don't have the vestiges of the old organizational forms and can be completely crowd-powered and crowd-based, and that is creating some very new and interesting opportunities. So first, I'm going to just show you a fun video of something very pedestrian and how crowds on Facebook can be used to solve a very pedestrian problem.
Facebook fans, brands are cuckoo for collecting them. But what are they actually doing with them? We believe that Facebook fans can do more than just like things. We believe they can think, collaborate, and contribute to the brands they love. So we created Fan Machine, the first app that allows brands to turn their Facebook page into a virtual creative department, making their fans central to the advertising process. And our client, Harley-Davidson, helped us launch it, enlisting their fans to develop a new campaign. How did it work? Harley downloaded the Fan Machine app and walked through a step-by-step process that allowed them to describe the project, set the awards, determine the submission window, and push the brief live. Then their fans got busy, submitting ideas, voting other ideas up or down, and sharing their entries on their own Facebook walls. While they did that, we tracked the brief, moderated the entries, collected fan data, and reported it all back to Harley. 222 ideas and 8,193 votes later, an idea from Harold Chase, a Harley fan from Tukwila, Washington, rose to the top. Harley fans loved it, the client loved it, and we crafted and produced it. So what did Harley walk away with? An idea they could really use. An ad campaign by their fans, for their fans, that's still running today. Fan Machine. It's one part ideation engine, one part social media platform, and one part ad agency. And the whole thing works like a machine.
Certainly makes me want to buy a Harley for sure. But what's interesting about this little example is that this is part of a company called Victors and Spoils. They made the New York Times Magazine in January when the broccoli versus kale campaign, some of you might have seen that. That whole campaign came about by, again, this kind of setup. What's happening, though, within the media world is that, the media industry, the advertising agencies, typically the admin guys, typically have two functions. One is the creative function, and the second is the function to place ads and buy ads. The placement of ads is becoming algorithmic, right? Basically, it's being driven by computers, and all the quants are taking over. So a big portion of the revenue is at risk. Then they go, well, we've got the creative people in New York, in Milan, in Paris, and in London, and they can come up with creative stuff. Then they see this, and it scares the heck out of them, right? So again, how they react to these capabilities and bring them inside is important. Next, I want to show you yet another. I've got a bunch of videos, so I'm sure keep showing you videos. I'll show you another video about some work we've done with NASA to solve some of their problems. So what we do with NASA is we take their computational problems in a range of disciplines and a range of programs, and then we use a platform called Top Coder to get them solved online. And then what we try to do is once in a while we'll run a field experiment on top of it to see what we can learn about social science from there. But let me show you an example here. And again, the results are very interesting.
Energy, in one form or another, powers everything on Earth, and the man-made things floating above it, too. This is the International Space Station. You've probably heard of it. It's powered by the sun, and the sun's energy is captured by the station's solar panels. Ensuring the space station harvests the most energy possible is a complicated task. Why? Well, for one reason, see those large solar panels? Holding them to the station are very long, thin arms called longerons. Anytime an odd number of longerons are in full sunlight, with others in the shadows cast by the rest of the space station, they bend and eventually break. For this reason, ISS operators are careful to position the station to limit shadowing, and so only an even number of longerons are shadowed at one time. However, this conservative positioning reduces the power the station can collect from the sun, thus causing inefficiency. NASA wants more power for the ISS. More power means more science and cool stuff that NASA can do on orbit. NASA needs a sophisticated algorithm, and they think you just might be the key to this whole equation. Introducing the NASA Tournament Labs International Space Station Longeron Challenge. Your solutions just may help power the International Space Station and allow more science from more scientists around the world. Consider this your invitation to blast off with NASA. For more information, visit topcoder.com/ISS if you've got the right stuff.
So if you look at the prize amount, $30,000 bucks, like in World Bank parlance, that's like decimal dust. and same also in terms of what NASA spends typically on a toilet, right? So it's small amounts. Here's what happened. We had lots of engagement. We had 2,000 people sign up, 459 submit code, 2,000 code submissions over this 2-week period. And winners came from around the world. From the ultimate winner was Italian, but we had Chinese, Polish, Estonians, Canadians. None of them were Americans, unfortunately, in the top 10. Which we can answer in many ways. So of course we care about, was this solution any good? So what I've plotted for you is the output of the algorithms, the final algorithms in terms of watt hours. And you can immediately see that, it was a very tight race, right? It was a very tight race. Lots of people were just neck and neck here. But what's shocking again is the counterfactual, right? So this is the internal NASA solution developed by one of their big contractors. They pay upwards of $20 million a year to access this. And we keep fighting about where this line is. Because they keep changing the model on us, but we keep winning. But this is where this is what's so interesting, that we did this in 2 weeks, and importantly, what's critical is that the solution approaches, the assumptions that people made about how to swing the giant arms of the space station were very different from what NASA had assumed, because they'd given them the full model. And one of the benefits of this contest has been that we can actually save on some critical maintenance work, given that we can use different approaches to solve this problem. So this basically sets this up for us, and work with colleagues. We've basically argued that we can set up these 2 distinct institutions of contests and communities. They both have costs and benefits, and I'll show you some details behind that. But just think about it in this way, that we can set these up. Sometimes we can use them in nested forms. And sometimes we can use them separately. Oftentimes, one implies the other. So when I started looking at Top Coder, you saw a very Darwinian winner-take-all types of contests being run. But then at the end of a contest, people are sharing code and learning from each other. And then those of you that have studied, Wikipedia and open source, as much of it as the big kumbaya, it's also a vicious status battle amongst people as well. So those 2 things, are intermixed quite a bit. The thing that I want to, from an innovation perspective, what I want to remind you about is that when we are thinking about innovation, and not everything else, just innovation, we care about the best solution. Not the average solution, but the best solution. And if you go back to Stats 101, right, remember that your stats professor reminded you that everything that you do, there's some kind of an underlying statistical distribution, right? And if you do it once by itself, most likely you'll get the average value, the average value in the middle, right? It's only through multiple independent trials can you get the extreme value, right? And this is what crowds enable us to do. We basically get multiple independent trials on the same problem, which enables us to get the extreme value. And so even if the elites, will have, the elites will look at this problem and say, well, no, our average is better, right? We're better, right? But we know the variance is going to be smaller, and what I'll show you again is that the tails for the crowds are just way farther out and pretty fat in many ways. And so this is why when we run head-to-head crowds versus elites, or crowds versus existing counterfactuals within elite organizations, comparisons, why we often end up winning, because overall we just get the numbers behind us and the diversity behind us, and that's what matters. So here's a pictorial view of this. This is data from some work that Alan McCormack and colleagues have done, and the X Prize contest for the 100-mile-per-gallon vehicle. You can just see diversity in designs, right? Just on the face of it, you can see how different designs are being done. And remember, if this is GM or Ford, they might have mocked up some designs, but the cost to instantiate each one of them will be very high for one organization. But if you distribute the cost across many, you'll get this. And then, of course, there's diversity in the types of people that are participating as well. So we have, one-man bands to high school kids to large corporations and so forth. And I think, there's all this buzz today about the self-driving cars, autonomous vehicles. For 30 years, industry made no progress. DARPA comes in and says, forget about you guys. We're just going to run a series of contests and challenges. And that's what basically sparked a whole new set of people to participate. And Sebastian Thrun out of Stanford ended up winning the contest. AI person with no real background in automotive engineering or anything like that, but took his knowledge about machine learning and imaging and applied it to this problem, and then that's what we're living with today. So again, this is what crowds enables us to do. But this is also historical. So we know there's great work being done in the history of science where crowds were behind lots of the technological innovations that we take for granted now. So some really great work by Peter Meyer now is showing that, in fact, airplanes were basically an open source invention until the time that Wright brothers achieved their technological breakthrough, and then patents came in. But then the world moved to France. The aerospace engineering world moved to France, where they had much more freedom to work and collectively solve problems. We know also from open source, we all know the story how well open source works. This is no longer, a decade ago this was still surprising, but today we take it for granted. But just think how within a decade we now have accepted open, collaborative, crowd-based problem solving to create some of our most vital infrastructure. Right? This is shocking. A decade ago, people were still laughing at me saying, why are you studying this stuff? And now it's taken for granted. And even some of our most elite organizations, Apple, we think about Apple as a paragon of a closed, everything comes from Steve Jobs' brain kind of a perspective. Or we're now channeling him somehow through some seances. Even within Apple, 40% of OS X and iOS is actually open source. And this is, I think, what firms have figured out to do as well. And it's great opportunities for us as researchers to go and study that. So I want to show you an example of some work we've done with our medical school, where medical school, especially at Harvard, we don't believe that there's anybody else smarter than us outside of Longwood Medical Center. And it's very hard for them to believe that some kid in Estonia is actually going to be able to solve their problem. So we said, well, let's just make that a hypothesis instead of take it as a fact, and let's see if this actually works. So we took a challenge in bioinformatics, spare you the details, and we said, can we actually get this solved through contests? Underneath it, I'm running an experiment, which I'll walk you through, but I just want to give you a sense of this. So again, we got extreme value outcomes very quickly. 122 coders participated, 654 submissions, great performance. I'll show this to you graphically in a second. Again, diversity in approaches, very important for us. Winners from places that the medical school could never hire. Imagine trying to get them H-1Bs to come, very difficult. And then, really high performance. But I want to translate this to you and show this to you as to how this works. So the overall performance dimension we had two aspects. One was how fast you could sequence, how fast you could do your calculations, and how accurate they were. So x-axis is a log scale of time. Y-axis is a accuracy score. 0.8, 80% is the theoretical maximum you can achieve. So you want to be in the top left. The red dot represents NIH Megablast, 20 years of research by our lead institutions and what that could do. The yellow dot represents my co-author Rami Arnaud, who no slouch, bachelor's from MIT, PhD from Oxford, professor at the Beth Israel and the Harvard Medical School, 18 months of his lab working away. And the green dots represent all of our guys working away. And unfortunately, it's all guys here working away at the problem, right? 2 weeks. So just completely outperformed the baseline counterfactual that existed. And this is our fat tail example as well, right? We just have lots of fat tails. And by the way, none of them had any background in computational biology, okay? So yeah, it works well. So what I did underneath here is I actually ran a little experiment saying, what if I actually allowed some people to just work in a Wikipedia-like environment where everything was being available as soon as they sent their code in for testing, this intermediate disclosures thing I'm saying, where as soon as you write your code, it becomes available for the people to use, versus we only disclose at the end of the contest. And we took these people, we assigned them randomly to these different treatments. And what we discovered was actually very interesting. I'll skip through all those details. What I want to show you is that in a world of completely open institutions where everything you do is available for everybody else to appropriate, incentives drop, right? So what we see is that fewer people participated, they worked less, Okay, they left earlier. They did fewer submissions in fewer hours, and so on. So, we just had less incentives to go through. So you need to, again, create the counterfactual to say, once something is completely open, well, how will people respond? Interestingly enough, though, that performance on average, both for individuals across skill levels and overall, was higher in intermediate disclosure regimes, right? And this becomes a puzzle. Like, why they're working less, yet they're doing better? Why is that? And what we find, actually, is, oh, sorry. Let me just try to go back. What we find, I'm showing you a qualitative impression. The left-hand side is the final disclosure regime where there was no revealing at all until the end, and the right-hand side is the intermediate disclosure regime. What we find when we analyze the data, and we went through every single code submission, mapped out all the different techniques they use and so on, what we discovered is that the intermediate disclosure guys found the best solutions earlier, and then they just raced to the top, right? They didn't do actually as much exploration. What you see here on the left-hand side is a ton more exploration in the final disclosure regime where people didn't have access to any of these solutions. So people were gyrating up or down, trying to find a better solution. Versus here, you found the best solutions and you took off. And also, once I know that Beth is in here and she's doing well, right, I'm not even going to participate, right, because I know how good she is. So it actually acts as a coordination and signaling mechanism as well, because what it says is that there's somebody way better than you. You can look at their code, and then you might just want to drop out, right? There's no reason for you to keep participating because there's somebody else that has better. So both of these things help us to make sense of why we, in fact, see the intermediate solutions do better than the closed regimes overall. I'm going to skip, because I have no time left. I'm going to skip and just show you a couple things to close with. So, of course, we want to know when crowds don't work. Some of our thinking here has evolved over time. Of course, I didn't ever believe this. I always thought crowds were the panacea. But we know that we need governance. We need governance of one type or the other, light or heavy governance in order for crowds to work. So I'm always amazed at how both Wikipedia and Debian and Linux have become these very ornate bureaucracies, right? With rules that can be the size of an encyclopedia, right? Especially in Wikipedia, in terms of how people participate. So there is always governance. It may not appear that way. What we have, the mechanism we have is self-selection, but there's still governance going on. At least in most recent times, the lack of governance created some major problems. So when we had bombings here in Boston a year ago, Reddit and 4chan went crazy in trying to crowdsource and identify the perpetrators. And they got it wrong. They got it so wrong that the New York Post put the wrong people on their front pages, of course, because there was no governance mechanism to say, is the solution you're providing, is that any good or not, right? In many of the settings I've shown you, I have the village idiot. I have the compiler telling me how good the solution is. In this case, we never had that, and there was no way for us to do that. So I think that matters a lot. Also, incentives mismatch. So I think the really important, interesting example of this was recently the X Prize. X Prize has done amazing things with space travel, with water cleanup, and so on. But they had a $10 million genomic sequencing challenge as well, which after 1 year only had two teams participate. And they shut it down. And the reason they shut it down is that there was just a massive amount of investment in the outside market to solve the same problem, and the incentives just weren't there for people to participate for $10 million prize, when the prize could be $1 billion. Finally, we see and observe that task interdependence matters. You want to modularize tasks and put them out there. Instead of saying, find me a cure for cancer, you can, in fact, say, help me synthesize this molecule. And that matters. Finally, I'm going to just show you an image and a video, 2 minutes, no longer, I promise, of what the future holds. So, William Gibson has said, the future's already here. It's just not evenly distributed. This is a glimpse. Into that. So let's have a look.
This is Local Motors. Welcome to The Forge, empowering a community of designers, engineers, fabricators, enthusiasts who are passionate, supportive, informative, inspirational. Community of give and take, on a mission to accelerate vehicle development. Open resources. Size doesn't matter. No idea is too small or big. Engage the Forge. Start with an idea. Sketch it, snap a picture, upload your work, and showcase it to the world. Meet experts. No, more like these experts. Evolve your idea. Get the tools you need. Get feedback. Improve your design. See it come to life. Make awesome real. Join a project. Give feedback. Contribute. Maybe compete. Get recognition. Or this recognition. Or even this.
They found a small company in Arizona called Local Motors.
Be a part of something huge. Be a member of the Forge.
So Local Motors is making cars like software. Everything is online, and then they wait till the end to print. They have two factories, two micro factories, one in Nevada and one in Arizona. They're going to build 50 more in the next 5 years. What's interesting is that all the designs are open source. You can just download. It's under GPL, Creative Commons license. You can just download it and start building the car yourself if you want to. But this, combined with 3D printing, is going to revolutionize how we think about car production and vehicle production. And already, Local Motors is now partnering with GE, one of the largest, oldest, and largest industrial firms, to take this approach of community-based product development and bring it into their appliance division, and also do local factory development as well. So I think this is the future. For us as researchers, what's amazing is that there's tremendous ability for us to study these platforms because they're all online, we can study them. And then if we're lucky, we can also run field experiments so that we can actually get causal inference that we care about. Thanks.